Hello and welcome to Evident webinar in remote visual inspection. Welcome everyone. My name is Bayard Morales. Today I'm going to be speaking about video scope maintenance, care and troubleshooting. Before we get started, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. So this seminar, this online seminar will last for approximately an hour. Presentation will take roughly 40 minutes, and then after that we will have a questions and answers session. So if you have any questions during the presentation or afterwards, please just use the question box that you can see here on your webinar client. So everyone's microphone is going to be muted, so it's going to be me speaking for some time. So if you have any questions, just type on the question box. And also, these webinars will be recorded and we'll make the recordings available at a later date. Please be aware that because we are recording this webinar, you're consenting to participate, and that is important for you to know that is licensed as well, your participation, so we can reproduce this at a later date. So just be aware of this. First thing is presenting the team. Today is slightly different from the previous webinars. Today I'm by myself. My colleagues, everybody was with other engagements with customers. So here I am, Bayard Morales. I am the remote visual inspection product manager for EMEA region. Essentially, video scopes is what I do, and that's the person who's going to be with you today. So the topics that we're going to cover. First thing is the industrial end scopes. We're going to take a look on the just general overview of the technology, so we make sure that everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. The second thing, we're going to see step by step, preparing for the inspection, during the inspection, and after the inspection, what are the things that we have to be careful with. And then after that, troubleshooting. So we're going to be covering what to do when things go wrong. Finally, just finish with closing remarks. So getting started with the presentation. First thing is just to make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about today. We're talking about industrial endoscopes. And in particular, we're going to be talking about video scopes. Right, so we're not really talking much about rigid bore scope or fiber scopes. Today is the day to speak about video scopes and how to take the best care of them. It's important for us, before we start, to make sure that we have the right names of the parts. So when I say something, oh, the distal end, we know what we are talking about. So for instance, on the video scope, if we see here is one typical video scope. This is a video scope from Evident, from Olympus. You have the base unit and you have the scope unit. The other part of this is the insertion tube. So the insertion tube, you're going to see me calling this also probe, and that is the part that goes inside my inspection region. On the end of the probe, on the end of the insertion tube, you have the articulations or bending section. So that is the part that we will be able to control with remote control. Right at the end of the bending section, you have the distal end, and that is the part where the optics is it lives, it stays there. Finally, you have also the light source and the remote control. So pretty much any video scope that you're going to see in the field, you're going to use, will have these parts. So we're always going to refer to these parts when we are talking about maintenance. Now, if we look right on the end of the probe, you have the articulation, the bending section. And this is the part here where we are able to control, using the remote control, we are able to articulate in different directions. Now, if you look just at the end of the articulation section, we have the distal end, which is a rigid metallic part, and the optical tip adapter, which are my lenses. So over this presentation, I'm always going to be talking about these parts that we are seeing here on the screen, like distal end, optical tip adapter, bending section, and so on. Now, if we look specifically on the probe, right, this probe that we are seeing here, This is the probe, that is the structure of the probe of the video scopes manufactured by Evident. And then you see clearly that there are, on the insertion tube, there are 4 different layers. So the outside layer, it's a tungsten braid, right? So that confers, that gives the probe resistance to abrasion. The next layer is a rubber tubing, and this makes the probe watertight. Next one, the inner tungsten braiding, again protecting everything that's inside the probe. And finally, you have the stainless steel coil, which acts like a spine and gives a bit of stiffness to the probe. Again, here we see the bending section, right? So that part has the structure. It's slightly different because it's more flexible. And then you have the distal end and the optical tip adapter. Now, if we look specifically on the end of the probe, especially the distal end, that's where a lot of the technology is, in fact, because you have there optical system, imaging sensor, and then you have cables going all the way to base units, to the main units. So you have electronic cables sending the electronic signal, the imaging signal, and then you have also a light guide, which transmits the light from the light source to the end of our probe. And here's the bending section. So this is just to be clear, like how important really this part here of the video scope is, because essentially the optical system and the imaging sensor are all there. Bear in mind the different video scopes might have different structures. So this is valid for the Evident video scopes. Now thinking specifically on the distal end, here's a zoom on the distal end. So you see this structure. This is what we find on the end of the bending section. Here's the metallic part. You have one lens here, the objective lens, and you have an illumination window. So the illumination window is responsible for transmitting the light. It's bringing the light from that light guide up here. You have an O-ring, which you're going to see. This creates a seal between lens and distal end, and the screw threads where we attach the tips. Here on the right, we see 2 types of tips, one forward facing, one side facing one. And then you have a similar structure. You have illumination window, and this is the one that distributes the light on our inspection object. And then you have the objective lens that captures the reflected light. Important thing for us to know as well, now I'm going to talk a lot about practical advice on how to do things with video scopes, how to maintain them. An important thing to know here is that the advice that I'm going to give here is valid for the Evident products, right? So video scopes, they might look similar, but really please be aware, anything that I discuss here is valid for our video scopes. Procedures for other brands, please check the manufacturer's manual. Just don't take it because it works for us here. It will work for a different video scope. Right, so that's it, because now I'm going to show you how to do a number of procedures with our video scopes. The first thing is to prepare for inspection. And the idea is whenever you're going to do inspection with a video scope, before you start doing this inspection, and in fact, before going to the inspection location, you should do a check on your kit. Right, so that is to avoid the situation that you get your video scope, you fly to your location that you're going to do the inspection, and you get there and there are no batteries or the cables are not there, or so on. So a check like this will take 5 to 10 minutes, but really might save you hours or even days and a lot of hassle as well. So we always suggest before you start inspection, or even before flying to, going to the inspection site, make sure that you have batteries, charger, and AC adapter. Check if all the cables, any remote control cables or screen cables are in good condition. Take a look on the insertion tube and the bending section to see if there is any signs of damage. If they are new, they should be in really good condition. Make sure that you have a cleaning kit so you can clean your lenses. We're going to see later how to clean the lenses. Check the distal end. Is there any crush marks, damage? Is it clean? Is there a ring? Again, that will help you keep the scope in good condition. Optical tip adapters, and that is a very important point. What are the lenses that I'm going to use for my inspection? Are they there? And are they clean? Right, so that is an important thing as well. Again, storage media. So if you're going to save images and videos, do you have either an SD card or USB or whatever media that you're using? And are they clean to be used? So that's the important thing to do as well before. Another thing that I suggest is to do a bit of a general check, function check. So you see the parts are there, you see that everything is in the box, but are they working? And then I suggest just follow this procedure. Turn on the video scope, check if the light comes on, check if the articulation is okay, take a look if the image quality is okay, and try to attach tips and check if the image with tips is okay. If your video scope is working, then you're ready to go. This type of procedure really, it's a 5 to 10 minutes procedure max, but will save so much time, and really I recommend for people try to establish either a standard operational procedure in your company, or if you are the user of the video scope, just make this into a habit. Before you start working, before even going to location, do a check, save yourself a lot of problems before they happen. So still in the preparation for the inspection, we always check if the distal end and the optical tips are in good shape. And one of the things that you need to know is, okay, we're going to need to change tips, we're going to need to install tips and clean tips and so on. So let's establish here now the best practice to manipulating the distal end and optical adapters. So the first thing is, do not hold just if you are holding the probe, and you're going to change tips and or manipulate distal end, do not hold the probe by the bending section or insertion tube. Make sure also the bending section is unlocked. So this is because it's not that it's going to break really the video scope, but once you start to bend by hand the bending section, you're putting a strain on the articulation cables. So it's not really good to do that. The second thing, and if I could say that's what you need to remember from this presentation, is never use tools when attaching or detaching optical tips. You only use your hands. This is a very important piece of advice. This is unfortunately still common to see customers that they damage lenses and video scopes and get repair bills, like major repairs to be done, because of using pliers or using tools to attach and detach tips. Right? We are going to cover here specifically what to do when the tip gets stuck. But the important thing is, if you're using a pliers or any tool to do this, you're very likely to damage your lenses, your video scope, right? So that's a very important point. And the last one is how it is done. In fact, the way to do it is, if you're going to change tips and going to manipulate distal ends, you just hold the distal end, which is the metallic part, the rigid part, because then you know you're doing the best practice to protect the kit. Moving on, here talking about how to attach and detach tips. We're going to do this pretty much all the time when we are using video scopes, because of different lenses I use different inspections or different regions of inspection. So on our video scopes, we always have when you're attaching the tips, you always have a double thread, two-stage threaded design. So as you can see here on the image on the right, you have one thread and then a second one that the optical tip will go through. So that means that you have, it's as if it was a security thing, because if you go through one and detach from the second one, the lens will not fall. You're not going to lose the lens during the inspection. So this is a sort of a security device. It's a way to keep it safe. So when you're attaching it, you have to go through two threads. And in really, like when you're doing the operation, it's quite easy to notice that. The second thing would be, when you're attaching and detaching tips, I always suggest to customers, do it over a box or a case or somewhere. If the tip falls, you won't lose the tip, you won't lose the lens. Right here in the example here on the right, I'm changing tips on a video scope, and I'm doing it using as a base. I'm using underneath my hands, you have the optical tip, the tip case, because if the lens fall here, it will just fall into the case and I can recover it. And well, in real life, what happens is you're going to be in a place that is full of oil, and it's a place that is sometimes if something falls into the floor, you cannot see. So it's better if it falls in the box and you can retrieve it. So that's it. If you change it this way, if it falls, you won't lose it or damage it. And again, I repeat, if you are attaching or detaching tips, never use tools to remove a tip adapter. Never use tools to do that, just your fingers. So one of the things that we covered is that on the distal end there is an O-ring. That's a rubber O-ring. And the function of the O-ring is to make sure that no liquid comes between the lens and the distal end. And I always suggest before attaching an optical tip, take a look if there is O-ring in place. That's essentially not a guarantee, but that helps you to keep the lens clean from inside. So that's the function of the O-ring. It's to create the seal, and you don't need to change an O-ring with a specific time. It's essentially is if you take the tip out and you see the O-ring there and it's fine, it doesn't look damaged, you don't need to do anything. But if it's not there, install it. It happens that with use, as we take the tips out, detach and attach them, sometimes the O-ring will fall, etc. So essentially it's just inspect it. If it's not there, you put one there. So important procedure, and probably this is the most common procedure that you need to know about maintenance of video scopes, is how to clean optical tips, how to clean the lenses. And also this solves the most common issue that we have with borescope inspection, which is poor image because the lenses are dirty. Fortunately, it's a simple thing for us to do, and it's something that I suggest that you do before you start your inspection. So open the box, clean your lenses, go to inspection. During your inspection, so many of the applications that we inspect, they are going to have oil or grease or any contaminants. So you might get your lens dirty during your inspection. You need to remove it and then clean it. And also after the inspection, before you store the lenses back on the box. The procedure is very simple, very quick, and requires almost nothing. Right. So what we need really is just cotton buds. The only thing that we have to think is these cotton buds have to be smaller than the optical tip, and you need some sort of cleaning fluid. And the cleaning fluid that we suggest is either isopropyl alcohol, commercially you're going to find as IPA, or pure ethanol. Right. So any of these two in 100% or 99% purity, which is a very common thing to find, they are perfectly fine to clean the tips and the distal end. And also important, we do not recommend any other sort of chemicals just because of compatibility really with some of glues and seals that we have in the scope. With those two here, we know that we are perfectly fine and they do an excellent job cleaning. So how to clean the scopes, the distal end, and here I have here a video that shows, I'm going to show to you guys. I'm just cleaning the optical tip here. So the first thing that you're going to notice is, oh, let's just go back here, there you go. The first thing that I point out is I'm not doing best practice here. I'm holding the distal end on the bending section, so that's a big no for me. But I was recording a video, so I needed to be able to see clearly. Let's go back to the video. So here I'm taking out the optical tip, and you see here I have my bottle of my cleaning fluid here and my cotton bud here. So I put some drops of cleaning liquid, and then I clean here initially the inside of the lens. So I started actually cleaning the inside of the lens. Very often people forget to clean the inside. That's important because sometimes you're going to have oil coming in. If we move on with video. And using a cotton bud, there is nothing you can damage really, like you can be quite thorough with your cleaning. So the next thing I do, I clean the outside of my tip. Right, so there are two things to clean here. I have the optical lens and I have the illumination window. You just really give it them a good clean with the cotton bud. And then finally, the last thing that you need to clean, I'm using again a little bit of cleaning fluid there, is the probe itself, the distal end. Right, so again, I think here we can see quite clearly that small hole there, that is the optical lens, right? So that is where the image is being formed, where the light's coming and capturing it to get the image. And underneath that, you have the illumination window. And also we can see underneath here the O-ring there. So give it a clean on that part as well. Clean the lens, clean the illumination window, and I suggest to clean also the threads that where we attach the tips, because these ones, when we clean them, will make attaching and detaching the tips better. You have to wait after doing a cleaning. You have to wait for a few seconds. Here, I think I done too fast, but wait for a few seconds for the liquid to evaporate. All right, so let's just finish up here, attach the tip, and that is job done, really. So that is how you clean the optical tip and the distal end. As you can see, so you have three surfaces to clean. So you have inside the lens, outside the lens, and the distal end. We always suggest clean all of them because that's exactly where the image is formed. I suggest clean the threads that where we attach the tips, because that makes attaching the tips easier. And before you put back the tip, leave a few seconds, like 10-15 seconds at least, to evaporate the cleaning liquid. Otherwise, when you attach the tip, it might be blurry. And if that happens, I always suggest, so just repeat the process with a clean, dry cotton bud. That will be enough to clear everything. So what we've seen here in this video really is the best practice in terms of cleaning lens, the optical tip and the distal end. As you can see, it's really, really simple. If you do this when you require it, but I would say do it frequently, the image quality would just be, it would be excellent. And really it's simple, it's a simple fix for the image quality problem. Most of the customers, they do some cleaning, but not everyone does. So try to think about doing this more often. So now we have checked it, that like we have the O-ring, and now we have the lenses are clean. We checked our kit is working. So before starting the inspection, of course, always make sure that health and safety aspects, everything is working. So we have our PPE, we have our personal protection equipment and safety equipment. Make sure that any machinery is properly locked out and tagged out, so there is no risk of it turning on when we're doing the inspection. And also make sure that the machine that we are going to inspect is not in operation or not conducting electricity. Also, before starting the inspection, check the operational conditions. So what is the temperature of the machine or the equipment that we're inspecting? Is that within the range of operation of the videoscope? Videoscopes, they can operate up to 100 degrees, but probably you want to be a little bit lower. And one of the things that people do if you're inspecting equipment that might be hot is to carry with you a thermometer to have an idea when actually you can start your inspection. The other thing is, if you're inspecting and you're going to immerse the probe, is there any sort of chemicals that you need to be aware? The videoscopes, they can be used in many situations, oil and water and so on. but just double check if what sort of liquid you have. In any case of questions, really get in touch with the manufacturer. And if you're regularly using your video scope to do inspections where you submerge your probe, I always recommend at least a yearly check on the probe to make sure that that resin tube, that second layer, is still in good condition. So during the inspection then, the first thing that we suggest is we want to have the best articulation possible, and before starting the inspection, uncoil the insertion tube, right? So the articulation on most of these scopes works with mechanical cables. So if the probe is already all coiled before going inside, you might lose articulation. So make sure that you have the probe uncoiled before starting. And in terms of navigation, there are 4 operations that we can do: is push, pull, rotate, and articulate, right? And I always try to make an analogy of using a video scope like driving a car. You don't want to go bumping into obstacles like what we see here. We don't want to be bumping into obstacles. It's more or less like, let's understand beforehand where we're going, so we know the route. Let's see exactly what we are looking for. Let's know what we are looking for. It's corrosion, defects, cracks, etc. Let's have an idea before. Follow the road. So if you're feeding the probe, try to go into space. You don't want to go to a wall and then space, wall and space. That will probably get your tips dirty and might start damage your scope. And essentially, is if you have a bend like the one that you have here on the right, don't go in the wall and then turn. You can try to actually turn it before you hit the wall. So that way, you can avoid the situation that you're bumping, getting your lenses dirty, and damaging your scope. So it's more or less like driving a car. If you're getting to a T-junction, you don't go to the end of the junction to the wall and then right. You essentially just follow the road. Again, if you, during the inspection as well, if you can avoid contact with surfaces, that helps, because lots of surface will have lubricants and grease. And then if you have a lot of oil, a lot of grease, you might need to remove the probe for cleaning. And the other thing is to use self-cleaning optical tips, like the ones that we saw before, the forward-facing one. In some of our models, they have some grooves on the sides that help to remove the oil. So that is also something that we can use during the inspection. Other advice during the inspection, and this again is very important: before pulling the insertion tube out of the inspection area, unlock the articulation. That is again one of the simplest ways to ensure your video scope is you minimize damage to your scope. As you see here on the right, if we have a video scope which is articulated. Now, if we pull this video scope as it is from the inspection region, 2 things will happen. This video scope will rattle, so it's going to be hitting the walls and hitting everything on its way. And the second thing that will happen, well, 3 things will happen. The second thing is we will put tension on the cables, because the cables here are engaged on the articulation, and we're going to probably do, when we're pulling out, we're going to be forcing them in different position. And the third thing is that we're going to increase the wear here on the bending section. So we have 3 things that are not helpful, and we can solve part of them unlocking the articulation. Again, when you're removing the insertion tube, do it slowly in a controlled manner. Just don't pull it in one go, otherwise you might risk damaging the scope. And when you're removing the scope, look for the insertion tube marks, because they give an indication how close you are to the end. So if you're doing inspection and you start to see, when you see this mark here, the 1 ring, that means that there is 1 meter of video scope left for you to pull. So you can go a little bit in a more controlled way. Also, when you pull it out, avoid leaving this insertion tube to swing freely, because sometimes you pull the video scope and the insertion tube swings and can hit the ground, and that is not exactly great for the video scope. So we finished our inspection. We've been through everything that we wanted. We unlocked the articulation before removing. What do we do next to keep the video scope in shape? First thing is to do a cleaning of the insertion tube itself. And it's a very simple process. Again, just use a little bit of water and neutral detergent. It doesn't need to be anything special. And then just wipe the insertion tube. This is particularly important. We always say to do this just after use. That's better, because always there will be a dust, there will be grease or oil, etc. And leaving these materials on the insertion tube for a long period might cause degradation. And cleaning the insertion tube is particularly important if you're using the probe underwater, because the water, especially if it's seawater, might sit there and it might attack, for instance, the tungsten, it might attack the rubber and so on. So just give a good wipe with water on the insertion tube, a little bit of detergent if you can, and that will keep it in good condition. The other thing is the distal end. As we saw before, the distal end houses the sensor, optical part of the video scope, and we suggest either, when you're going to store it, either keep an optical tip or the vinyl cap protector on the distal end. Do not leave the distal end unprotected, and that is just to avoid cracking the lens or damaging the distal end. A lens, they are consumables. If a lens cracks, you can replace it, but the distal end is a little bit more difficult to repair. So you want to try to protect that part as much as we can. Finally, when we're storing the video scope, just store it as in the box that it came. All the box, they have custom cutouts. It should be quite easy actually to put them back. And there are diagrams as well on the cases. So avoid doing this here that we see, like just shoving the cables and everything and then closing the case. These might damage cables, might damage the probe. It's not so common, but like this might happen. Sometimes we're in a hurry. So take a few minutes to do this properly. And the other thing as well is, as we see in this example here, instead of coiling the probe this way, the customer coiled on the other way. And that's not exactly great. It's not going to destroy completely the scope, but we see here that there is tension here, is bending the probe here in an angle. So it will be better, more natural to put on the other way. So essentially, it's just when you put it back with a little bit of care. It will take you, instead of 30 seconds, will take you 1 minute, but probably will save you a lot of hassle. So let's say that even that we prepared everything very well, something went wrong, right? And that is, it happens. It happens to everyone. It happened to me. It can happen to everyone. Right? So what happens then is that we need to do troubleshooting. I selected here the top 5 of the most common things that happen in terms of troubleshooting. This is my top 5 based on customer experience and based on my experience. So the issues that we're going to take a look is poor image quality, damage to the bending section, loss of articulation, and stuck tip adapter and probe entrapment. So this is my top 5 in terms of things that go wrong on the field and how we can solve them. Let's start with poor image quality. So the symptoms, of course, is you're doing the inspection, image is blurry or foggy, or the edges of the objects that we're inspecting, the things that we're seeing, they're not very well defined, or colors are not properly reproduced, image is pixelated or noisy, or there are scratch marks or cracks on what we're seeing on the field of view. What causes this is, the first thing is what we said, lenses might be dirty or contaminated with oil or liquids. Right? That's very common. The second cause is when things are blurry or foggy or we cannot really see very well, is simply that we are not using the right lenses. Right, so that is an important thing. There are different types of lenses: near focus, far focus, side facing, forward facing, and so on. And a common issue is that we are using the incorrect lens. Also, when we see that the colors are not right, we might not have done a color balance. And this is a very simple procedure also that we can do when we are starting our inspection. Pixelated, the image when it's pixelated, sometimes what happens is that we have the zoom activated, because essentially the zoom on video scopes is digital, so it's more or less like the zoom on most of mobiles. When you start to zoom in, you start to see the pixels of the picture, and that is the case. It might be the case with the video scope. And finally, if we have scratch marks and cracks, that is likely indicator of a optical tip that's damaged. So solutions for poor image quality, the first one that I would go for, and pretty much if anything of that, any of these symptoms show up, is to clean the optical lenses. Right, so do not forget, clean the optical tips and clean also the distal end as the procedure that we've shown. It's very simple and probably will solve a lot of the issues. The second thing is, if your lenses are clean but the image is still blurry, it might be that you're using the wrong lens. So if you're using a lens from far, but if you're using, for instance, a lens for far focus, those lenses are to be used from far, from a distance. But if you get them very close to the surface you're inspecting, everything will become blurry. So essentially, you should be using a different lens. And this is a very common issue that we see in the field, really, which is generally customers buy far focus lenses, but they are going to use these from far, from close for near inspection. And then the idea is really to have the right lens for each inspection. You will be surprised, in fact, how much better an image, if you test different lenses, how much better the image could be. The other thing is, if the colors are not right, it's a very simple thing. Just before starting inspection, do a white balance. So the white balance essentially is just, it's a 30-second procedure. Just press 2 or 3 buttons, and that will calibrate the colors of your scope to make sure that what's white is white, what's blue is blue, and so on. And again, this is quite often we see images from customers where the colors of the things are not correct, or they have a blue or green tint, and that's just the lack of a white balance. Finally, if the image is super pixelated, make sure that the zoom is set to 1, because then the image is going to be as normal without any zoom. And finally, if you've done everything that's above and the image is still poor because you see cracks and scratches, probably the lens is damaged, you do have to replace the lens. If we come back, if you remember, I said that we should protect always the distal end, especially when we're storing it, because if your lens is cracked, the optical tip is cracked, we can replace that. So if the distal end is cracked, then it's a little bit more difficult. That said, it's quite difficult to crack the distal end. So the other favorite from what we see in the field is damage to the bending section, right? So the symptoms is the outer braiding is frying or worn, or the rubber tubing is exposed, or also the braiding, the tungsten braiding can be bunched when we see like a kind of compressed or deformed as well. And here I have two pictures, at least, like how things look like. So here in this one, you have the outer layer on the bending section is damaged, so you see the rubber tubing there already. And then you have here another case, a bit more severe, where here is the bending section, this part here. Well, you have that distal end damage as well, but you can see like clear damage to this part here. I think here in this case, you already can see, I think the tubing is also damaged. So quite bad damage here. Potential cause of this, the first thing is normal. right? So there is no vidscope that will last forever. And this outer layer here, its job is to protect, and it's as if it was almost a sacrificial layer, because that will take most of the friction with the surface, right? So during normal operation, as you inspect, especially if you're inspecting things made of metal, there will be tear and wear and tear of these parts, right? So sometimes is normal. To get to this point, maybe is a little bit too much, but a bit of let's say wear is normal. A common thing that might cause this type of damage, especially if it's repeated several times, is to forgetting unlocking the articulation. Right, so if we repeatedly remove the video scope when it's locked, we're going to put a lot of stress here on this area, and we're going to put a lot of friction. So again, that is a case that might be, this one might be avoided, not normal wear and tear, but to unlock the articulation, we can reduce things. And the other thing is probe entrapment, right? So it might happen that the probe gets entrapped. Often the entrapment will be in the bending section, and when we are trying to maneuver it out, we might damage this part here as well. So what to do? First thing is always unlock the articulation before removing the inspection area. So that really, like, that is the main thing to protect the bending section. The other thing would be to try to minimize the amount of friction that this probe go through. Use rigid sleeve, guide tubes, or flex and stay pipes. That reduces the amount of friction that the probe has to go through when we're feeding it. So that protects not only the bending section, but also the insertion tube, and will make this part go longer. And one important suggestion is, especially if you have something that's not that bad, this damage probably didn't happen in one day. This happens over time, is replace the bending section before it becomes too damaged, right? So this is a minor repair, can be done by us. Just get in touch. When you start to see damage, go for the repair, because that will save you from damaging the probe further. So you can replace that depending on the level of damage. The next thing that we see sometimes is the loss of articulation. So essentially, to try to bend the video scope, the bending section, it doesn't articulate full angle, or articulation is slow, or the probe doesn't articulate in one direction. The cause of this, the first one would be excessive strain or articulation cable. So with time, if the probe is super coiled, there will be a lot of strain on the articulation cables, and they cannot extend to the full the full angle. Or the other way around, when the cables, they have excessive slack. So with time and use, the cables responsible for articulation can lose the tension, and then you start to not be able to articulate for the full extent. The other thing is, if we see there is absolutely no articulation in one direction, it might be that the cables are snapped. So that is the severe part of this case. Solutions for that. So the first thing that we suggest to avoid is make sure you uncoil the probe completely before starting the inspection, before going to starting inserting the probe, right? Because that makes sure that the cables have optimal conditions to work on the bending of the articulation section. And the other thing is, if you start to see your video scope losing articulation a bit, that's something that can be adjusted in most of the cases, right? So if your video scope is still articulating, bring it to us, get in touch, because we can go to the repair center and it's possible to recover a great part of the articulation. So as long as the cables are not broken, there is a lot we can do. But if your video scope doesn't articulate in one direction, we might need to take a look. It might be major damage, and anyway, we have to take a look on that, right? So suggestion again is try to, before breaking the cable completely, before it does articulate any longer, bring to us, because we can do a lot is possible to do before the cables break. So going towards more complex problems that might happen, Stuck optical tip. What to do when a lens doesn't come out of the distal end, right? So that is a classic problem. It happened to everyone. It happened to me already. It happened to everyone. Several causes. We can have not inserted correctly the optical tip. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you're doing the procedure as you should. The second thing is sometimes on the threads of the distal end, you might have dust, contaminants, rust that make it difficult to turn the tip. The other thing would be cross-threading, when essentially you come with an angle and the threads, they don't connect very well. And the other thing is damaged optical tips, right? So it happens sometimes. We see this in the field. Customers that use, for some reason or the other, they use tips, they use tools to remove or attach tips, and the tip become pinched, crushed, and that makes removal impossible. So the solutions for that is, the first thing, when you see a videoscope with an optical tip attached, don't panic, right? I always say, first thing is go to have a cup of tea, come back, because essentially is when we are nervous, when we're trying to take a tip out and we get nervous, we can make the problem worse forcing it. So if the tip is stuck, again, do not use tools, only fingers. Go, for instance, wash your hands, make sure your fingers are clean and dry, because sometimes we get nervous and we start to sweat, and then we try to take the tip and we cannot. Then the next person that is calm and has dry hands, go there and take it out. So that's another thing. So try to do the procedure as normal to remove the tip, but one simple thing that you can do and helps in certain cases is, instead of rotating it anti-clockwise, which would be for the removal, try to rotate slightly clockwise, as if you were attaching it, the tip, and then try to remove again. I've seen this in the field sometimes. I think there is a little bit of dust or rust or something that goes inside, and when we rotate the other way, I think we dislodge that and it comes back to normal. So that's another try. And finally, one thing that can be done is to try to apply a bit of heat to the optical tip. When I say heat, is 40 to 50 degrees, we say hair dryer temperature to the tip. So you warm the tip a bit and then you try again. The idea here on this method here is that you are expanding the tip. It's made of metal. You expand the tip a little bit, and that makes removing easier. But the main thing is, like, don't panic. And if you cannot take the tip, let us know. Go to the repair center and you come back with your scope in one piece. And the final one on the top 5 is probe entrapments. Is when the videoscope gets stuck on the inspection area. And of course, well, the symptom is the probe is stuck there. And here I would like to put a very clear notice for everyone, which is this is likely to be the most severe problem that you can have with a videoscope. I think it's the nightmare of everyone. You're doing inspection, you get stuck and you don't know what to do. So this is a very severe problem, because it can lead not only to damage on the borescope, but also when you're removing it, you might leave parts of the videoscope, like optical tips and things, inside the inspection area. And so this leaving things inside, for instance, if you're inspecting a turbine, it's not a good idea. It's a very bad idea, and we know it might cause a lot of problems and costs and risk. Right, so that's a very important thing. This is important thing. Let's take a look at that. The important thing as well is the methods that we're going to talk about here. They are not a guarantee that work every time, but based on our experience, this can help solving the issue and hopefully reduce the chance of having debris left behind. Right, so that's just a notice for everyone. Potential cause of that is, well, the probe probably is pinched, is stuck between two surfaces in the inspection area. If you haven't locked out the machine, the machine might have moved, and then it might be trapped in between moving machinery. And one thing that I unfortunately seen is customers using a 6mm video scope when they should be using a 4mm video scope, right? And I would like to mention is gearbox inspection is something that you have to be very aware. Be careful if you're using a 6mm. Gearbox has lots of, even large gearbox, they have lots of small spaces. Probably you should be using a 4, right? So that is potential cause. Solution is, the first thing is, before starting any inspection, make sure the machine is locked out and the probe is away from moving parts. That's the first point. Second thing, do not panic, right? And it's very similar when we get the tip stuck, we get very anxious, very nervous, and try not to pull the probe forcefully, right? Some people say like, oh, you just yank it out, and that's not a good idea because you have high possibility of actually leaving bits and bobs behind inside the inspection area. So the first thing that you should do, you're trapped, unlock the articulation, right? And you can even look around with the video scope to see exactly where you are. That will give you orientation. But then the advice that we have is get a probe and rotate it, right? Rotate it several turns to one direction and then several turns to another direction. And while you're doing this rotation, try to gently push and pull. Just wiggle it a little bit. Because the idea when you're trapped, you want to try to reduce the friction between the probe and the surface. And really, as I say, it's not a guarantee, but based on my experience, that is the best chance that you have of actually making the probe free. So if you really get the probe and rotate, but then you rotate several turns in one direction, several turns to the other, it might be that you change a bit the angle of attack on between the probe and the machine, and that might help you to free the probe. So as I say, like, this method is not a guarantee, but based on experience that we have in the field, rotating the probe is something like you have to try before just pulling it out, because sometimes when we just pull it forcefully, we make even the friction even bigger. So if you're trapped there, try rotating the probe, lock the articulation and try to rotate the probe, and little by little wiggling it. Right, so that will be the most severe problem that you have in terms of video scope. Hopefully you don't happen that to you very often, but if it does, try keep it cool, unlock articulation and rotate. That would be my suggestion. And finally, we always try to say if preventing is better than fixing. And suggestion that we have is always for all video scopes, do at least yearly preventative maintenance. It's more or less like the maintenance that you do in your car, because that enables us to make sure that we detect problems before they become big issues. And also we make sure that video scope is performing at the maximum level of quality. And in fact, we suggest, like, with customers, take a look, we have service contracts. These are available in different regions in different forms, but essentially some of the contracts that we have is like extended warranty. So that is extending the warranty on the kit, not covering wear and tear. We have the yearly preventative maintenance service contract. That would be an ideal one for you starting, because every year then you have a check on your body scope, goes to our repair center. Technicians, they do a good look on it and make sure it's working as it should. And also you have a full coverage contract. So that was one is on that contract that is almost like an insurance. Everything is covered, labor and parts are covered. So if you want to look into a way to minimize the overall cost of keeping the video scope, it's suggested for you to take a look, get in touch with us, take a look on this website here. So if you go Olympus IMS Service Solutions, you might be able to see there the contacts, or just get in touch. So as usual, I run out of time. We're almost in an hour of the session. Just closing remarks. First thing is, preparation will save you a lot of time. 5 minutes preparing will save you hours on the field. Do a bit of preparation. There are several things that the user, when you're using the video scope, you can solve with simple procedures. And 3 things that will reduce damage and reduce costs is make sure that everyone's trained, do a pre-inspection, like 5 minutes to save 5 days really, and conduct regular maintenance. Preventative is better than fixing. So that is the presentation. If you guys want to see a video scope in practice, discuss anything with us, if you go here to the website evidencescientific.com/contact, you can get directly in touch with us. Let's keep going. That is from my side. With this time, we managed to finish on time, so that's great. Thank you guys, everyone. Thank you for your participation. You'll receive a email follow-up with a few links, and so hope that you guys have a good rest of the day and speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.